Thank you, Olivia, Elliot, Michael, and Elvan. I'm so grateful for you guys as a music team. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Our decluttering team has been busy this week. The first thing they decided to do is go through all of the Christmas decorations. You know, a lot of people brought Christmas decorations here to the church, and we had usually about 5 times what we needed to use each year. But so they went through it and just, pitched the stuff that was just without hope. But they chose actually the nicer stuff, and it's on a table in the gift and bookshop. Go in there, take whatever you want, bring it home, or hand it off to someone else that you love, or maybe somebody you don't love. but check it out there, and if you want to just, give us a donation for whatever you find in there, that's great. But yeah, so let me give you my official good morning. There's been a lot of talk about census questions over the last few weeks. And it reminded me of 10 years ago, Carl and I were in Kansas City looking for a congregation to serve. And I found out about a temporary job that I could have, and that's working for the census. But this is the year before, because the census is officially taken on April 1st, every 10 years. So it'll be April 1st, 2020, wherever you're living, that's where you need to fill out the form. But the year before, what they do is they get temporary workers to go out and survey the neighborhoods and survey the countryside and all of that just to see what's there. Are the houses that were there 10 years ago still there? Are there new ones that have been built? That sort of a thing. So, and they had these proprietary handheld computers where we would mark through GPS to show where each of these houses was. And sure enough, I'd found some that had been torn down. But I got assigned to one of the rougher neighborhoods in Kansas City. I learned back in Chicago, it's all about perception, it's all about your attitude. I mean, neighborhoods that are supposedly unsafe aren't really unsafe, it's just that sometimes we just put out that wrong energy, or if we're in fear, we'll draw unpleasant experiences. So I'm going through these neighborhoods, walking down and just, and some of these neighborhoods were almost disheartening as to what bad shape, the houses and stuff were in. So I'm going up and down these streets, and then all of a sudden I'm coming up this one street, and it was like a lighthouse on a hill. This one house was beautifully maintained, freshly painted, the lawn perfectly manicured, window boxes with flowers in the garden. It was just such a contrast to everything that was around it. But I thought, wow, this will preach. It's that sense of like, wow, it was like, no, I'm not going to let the outer appearances or where I'm at dictate, what our house should be like. And it was just, like I said, it stuck with me. 10 years later, I can see it as clear as I did that day. So yeah, sometimes challenges come into our life. In fact, challenges come into our life pretty regularly, don't they? And occasionally someone will sum up their feelings by saying, well, what are you going to do about it? That's life for you. It's like, no, that's not life for you. That's existing. So it's just a matter of letting go of those negative ways of thinking and think about it in a new way. See things rightly rather than make things right. Life itself is whole. It's complete. It's rich. Life is full and can be fulfilling. In other words, it's not life that needs to change, it's us. How we engage life, the way we view it, the way we accept it. As the late newspaper critic Brooke Atkinson once put it, there's nothing that is uninteresting. There are just people who are uninterested. So many of us take a wrong turn when we focus on the physical world rather than the spiritual foundation of the world. And those that search for spirituality need to turn within. And as I've said, there's no need to be more spiritual. We're already spiritual beings having a human experience. We just need to awaken to that and recognize our spiritual heritage, so to speak. Problem is, we forget. Sometimes every day we forget. But when we forget, we get into some of those unpleasant experiences. So when we remember, we then can stop reacting to the people around us or the circumstances or the bad news that we're hearing. We tend to jump on a merry-go-round of working for food, clothing for the body, providing the essentials that we deem important to us in this physical world. but we neglect the time and the attention needed to cultivate the soul, cultivate the spiritual being that we truly are. A lot of us have reached a point in our lives where one point we turn around and say, is this all there is? We may have lost the ability to enjoy and appreciate the very things that we worked so hard for. And as Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. It's from the Gospel of Matthew, 4th chapter, 4th verse. Now, I believe Jesus was talking about that inspirational flow, that energy that comes to us. Like I said, our minds are connected to a divine mind. And if we're willing to open to that and recognize that connection, we can have that divine download of divine ideas that are right for us to express. Let's talk a little bit about cultivating inspiration. Does inspiration just happen? Is it like a lightning bolt? Or is inspiration the result of soul cultivation? As a minister, I depend upon inspiration. I depend upon tapping into that inner flow as often as I can. Yet I found that I need to do things to cultivate that flow. And it may be something that's impractical, something that I wouldn't normally think about. Maybe just taking a walk, taking a break. It may mean just listening to the music that I like rather than other people like. Or some form of recreation, some kind of change of pace. In other words, I need to sow seeds that are going to renew my soul. Now, the good news is that divine guidance is always there, always flowing. The bad news is that each of us can find times when we are completely ignoring it. Any of us can get distracted by the dramas of this outer world we operate in. And at times we get out of balance, out of gear, or out of sync. In the notebook of Leonardo da Vinci, there's a paragraph that we all need to hear. Da Vinci writes, "Every now and then, go away and have a little relaxation. When you come back to your work, your judgment will be more sure. To remain constantly at work will cause you to lose your judgment. Go some distance away, because then your work appears smaller, and more of it can be taken in at a glance. A lack of harmony and proportion is thus more readily seen." There was another wise individual who had a comment about this in the 6th chapter of Mark. Jesus says, "Come ye apart for a while, into a desert place, be by yourself and rest." So don't beat yourself up if you forget, that you're a spiritual being having a human experience. One of my challenges is that drive or that assumption that we always need to be productive. We had this industrial revolution that happened, and suddenly we shifted from an agricultural or organic mindset to this industrial mindset. If a machine breaks down, it needs to be fixed, or it needs to be put a new battery in it, or whatever it is. And yet we've forgotten, what our great-great-grandparents knew about the organic part of life. You plant a seed, it doesn't sprout immediately. You have to have that patience to allow it to sprout. For everything, there is a season, sort of an attitude. So if we don't understand that organic and have that industrial mindset, sometimes we look to our work to find the fulfillment in life. And if that fulfillment doesn't come through our work, perhaps we go find another job thinking maybe that'll solve the problem. If we look for it in relationships and don't find it there, we look for another relationship. When in reality, like I say, it's not a matter of looking for Miss Right, it's being Mr. Right for that Miss Right, or whatever. The source to make our lives more creative and more fulfilling is within ourselves. We need to take time to make time to let it go. To let go in some way and to cultivate an interflow and get into that divine process. There's an ancient Persian poem that reads, "If you come to the back wall of your pantry and you are down to one loaf of bread, sell that loaf of bread and buy some white hyacinths for the soul." Now, if you're trying to think, what does a white hyacinth look like? I've actually got a picture up here. And they come in other colors, but white. I had a fascinating experience, though, because I'd remembered, this poem, and I jumped online to, just look for references to it, and I found some modern writers had changed it. Rather than coming to the back of the pantry and finding one loaf and selling it, they had changed it to when you get down to your last 2 loaves, sell one of them and buy white flowers. It's like they couldn't possibly conceive of stepping out in faith. It's not, they couldn't conceive letting go of that last loaf of bread and knowing that another loaf of bread is coming. And that's part of the challenge we have, in our society these days, is being willing to step out in faith, to recognize, that God is my source. Not my job, not my pension, not my Social Security payments. God is my source. And if I'm living on a fixed income, I got to realize that I'm the one who fixed it. Can you be open to perhaps substance coming to you through a surprise or some other channel besides the ones you've been used to? Whatever we focus on expands. So if we're focused on lack, we may need to turn our attention to beauty. Allow that beauty to expand in our lives. We should never be too busy or too frugal to buy a few white hyacinths for the soul. The key for each of us is to figure out what's the white hyacinth experience for each of us, because it's different for some people. Some people do like to just totally relax, and yet I've met some people who like for vacation they want to have an active vacation. They'll go volunteer at Habitat for Humanity for the week and build houses. Whatever it is that works for you. For instance, this is what a vacation should be about. Occasionally taking time for a music concert or a walk in the park. Whatever it costs, you're going to find that it's worth 10 times what it actually costs in time and money. It's like those ads, this is X, this is $5, but hey, this is priceless. So yeah, feeling that refreshing attitude of the soul. Remember that Jesus said, "What has a man profited if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul?" Gospel of Matthew, 16th chapter, 26th verse. So when we are at the point of decision of what to do, we may encounter a contrary voice. That someone might start talking us out of doing what it is we want to do. But I find most of the time it's just an inner voice that I have of a prior authority figure in my life. The voice will say something like, hey, you need to make your time and money count. You need to be productive, like I said before. And from this perspective, it might look like it's a total waste of time to just take a half an hour in the middle of your day, maybe after lunch, to just sit in a park somewhere and just enjoy and just take in all of nature. So, it may seem ridiculous that half hour of renewal could actually be the wisest use of our time. So what are we going to do to cultivate that inner flow? Those vital energies are always available to us. And that's where in Unity we talk a lot about just stepping back into the flow and allowing that energy to just revitalize and re-energize us. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "I think it is the best of humanity that goes out for a walk. In happy hours, I think all affairs can be wisely postponed for a simple walk." So those vital energies, it's us that chokes it off by getting all caught up, like I say, in the dramas of life. In the Bible, the prophet Isaiah had this in mind when he wrote, "Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. He who has no money, come. Buy, eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Hearken diligently to me and eat what is good, and delight yourself in fatness." That's the gospel, where it says the book of Isaiah, 55th chapter, starting with the first verse. All of the world's spiritual belief systems encourage us to beware of the seduction of materialism, of getting lost in physical world and outer appearances. And when we do get lost, we just need to seek out that divine guidance and figure out what our white hyacinth is going to be. 200 years ago, a young man leaving his home for the first time was walking through the hills of rural Massachusetts. It was a cold autumn evening. He was getting quite homesick. The sun was setting. He was starting out on this new life, but then he started hearing that contrary voice. Like, oh man, what are you doing? This is stupid. I should turn around. He was walking as the sun set and is searching his heart for answers, for strength, for courage to go on, and he's trying to figure out what he should do. And he looked up to the sky, and in the sky, against the backdrop of the setting sun, he sees a bird flying south, a waterfowl. William Cullen Bryant wrote one of his most famous poems. The first stanza reads, "Whither midst falling dew, while glow the heavens with the last steps of the day, far through the rosy depths dost thou pursue thy solitary way." You find himself just wondering, how does that bird know? How does that bird know? How does it know where to go? How does it know that when it gets there, everything's going to be okay? The lesson sank into his mind, and he reveals it in this 1812 poem, To a Waterfowl. And it finishes, "He who from zone to zone guides through the boundless sky thy certain flight, in the long way that I must tread alone will lead my steps aright." Trust in that divine guidance, that you'll always know what's the right thing to do. He looked up to the sky, but in the Bible symbolism, when someone looks up to the sky, it's not that they're trying to appeal to God up there. What they're saying is, look away from the chaos, the dramas of the physical world for a moment and get centered once again. So, life can be challenging. Good news is we've got the tools to handle anything that life throws at us. And if we turn within as quickly as we can snap our fingers, we can establish a flow of inner light. We can look around us and find the silver lining in the darkest cloud, and find inspiration, as William Shakespeare said. He found tongues in the trees, books in the running stream, sermons in the stones, and good in everything. Suddenly, we feel and experience transcendence. So what is your white hyacinth experience? It can be most anything. It can be meditation. It can be a change of activity. It can be, for some people, the purchase of some little trinket that suddenly lends excitement and interest to my life. It's sometimes a practical sort of impracticality, something that'll lift our spirit, something as simple as just deciding one night as you're preparing dinner to get out the best linen tablecloth, the silver, the china, a candle, and surprise that someone special for dinner. Do something that you normally don't do. Maybe rent a bicycle and go for a ride. Planting flowers in a window box like that family in that neighborhood that I was surveying. Purchasing an item of clothing, a practical type of impracticality. But you'll find that it'll give your spirit a boost. I couldn't find the author of this line when I was looking, but it's, "I was common clay until roses were planted in me." And the only way that roses can be planted in us is for us to do the planting. Plant those seeds. Now we can find other people to help nurture that and bring us the richness and fulfilling experiences. But what I found is that I need to make a commitment to taking that time off, or to taking that time to just do nothing. Things become interesting once again because we finally become interested. The people of Europe think that we in the United States are all work and no play, and they've got a point. In fact, when we look forward to a week or two off, they take 4 weeks off in August. Everybody just recognizes that 4 weeks is important to them. In England, when somebody asks you, what do you do, they want to know what your hobby is rather than what it is you do for a living. In baseball, any pitcher learns that he or she needs to have a change-up pitch. No matter how strong the pitcher's fastball, batters can learn the rhythm of the pitcher and start to get hits. So the pitcher has to have a change-up, a pitch that travels at a different speed. And then a lot of pitchers will also develop the curveball, another form of change-up. So what is your change-up pitch? And I've noticed that the universe can throw me curveballs. Suddenly we're faced with a new challenge in our life. We may get a job offer, have to move. We find that we're laid off. Our career paths may be interrupted, or maybe we need to change careers, as perhaps the occupation that we're in has suddenly become not needed anymore in our society. I once heard a Unity minister say that he thinks everybody should have to start all over again every 10 years. I mean, even I couldn't quite wrap my mind around that one. But his point was, is you get into a rut. You know, you get into a rut, and so what are you going to do to just suddenly have that change up, to revitalize yourself? I remember when I was a kid, I was listening to some adults talking about the Second World War and experiencing it. And of course, you know, every man of a certain age, you know, was off to Europe or off to the Pacific. But what they pointed out was that there was something special about being back home and being part of a common cause. Everybody could kind of agree, that we need to fight Hitler's death cult of Nazism, to fight Mussolini's corporatism and fascism, and to fight Tojo's empiricism. Men and women would go to work in factories. In fact, I heard a guy who called into a radio show the other day talking about his mom, went to work during the Second World War putting the electronics in B-17 bombers. I know Carla's mother, actually before Carla was born, her older brother, shared about, mom was suddenly gone. Well, mom was building the B-25 or was it B-26? B-25 bombers, in Wichita, Kansas. Or if they didn't do that, they'd go to work for the Red Cross, USO, find some way to volunteer to help. Now, I'm not trying to romanticize war, but the universe threw a curveball at everybody. And by responding to it, many people reinvented themselves. So if we ignore the impulse, the universe sometimes comes along with a spiritual 2x4 to the back of the head. It gets our attention, and we start to make changes. If some call it serendipity, I call it divine order. Suddenly we find that we do have the strength, we do have the ability, we do have the inner fortitude to get into new things. And by putting our heart and soul into it, we find a creative outlet. It becomes meaningful and life becomes interesting again. And if you think you are too old to get excited about new things, then perhaps you are just too old. So here are this week's takeaways. You can find a copy out on the credenza there in the foyer. Do you take your vacation time? Do you use your vacation time in a fulfilling way? Remember that much of the development of the mind or the cultivation of the soul comes from relaxation, periods of introspection, and periods of meditation. Do I need leisure time? Do I have a hobby? Certainly some people work so hard at filling their leisure time that old-fashioned loafing becomes a lost art. I got a kick out of it when we moved here, seeing the weekly paper Creative Loafing. Sometimes we think we need to sometimes the thing we need to recapture is to simply sit or lay in the grass, look at the clouds, steep ourselves in the wholeness that is this world. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is to do absolutely nothing. As I said before, if we have opened our mind to the divine mind for guidance, we've followed through on the guidance, do all that we can do, sometimes the best thing we can do is just do nothing. Wait for that further guidance to come. Recognize the things that you love to do and do them. So what I encourage you to do is be willing to listen when your mind, your body, or your affairs is telling you, hey, it's time to change things up, time to recharge the batteries. Then open the mind to divine guidance as to what you need to do next. Sometimes it's a call to a major change. Sometimes it's a call for leisure. Sometimes it's finding your change-up pitch. Sometimes it's looking up and noticing a lone waterfowl flying across the sky. Number 4, look for those things in your life that will facilitate a renewal of your soul. Like I said, it's different for each individual. Number 5, these do not come about automatically. There's a conscious choice involved. So each month, build into your calendar some way to tap your inner flow of vital energy and to renew your soul. And then number 6, understand the wisdom of our Persian poet. If you come to the back wall of your pantry and you are down to one loaf of bread, sell that one loaf of bread and buy some white hyacinths for your soul. This week's video is about a man who found himself at the back wall of the pantry.